March 27th, 1977. It was a Sunday, and two Boeing 747 passenger jets were taxiing and preparing for takeoff on a very foggy runway, not knowing that within just a few minutes they were about to be the deadliest aircraft accident in the history of aviation. This would shock the world. What's up guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's Tesh. I hope you guys are well. Today's video is going to be about a plane crash that happened in 1977 and how this plane crash became the deadliest plane crash in aviation history. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Please don't forget to drop a like, comment and subscribe. Also, thank you for watching. On March 26th, 1977, Pan American Airways Flight 1736 Clipper takes off from Los Angeles International Airport with a stop at New York and should land at the Gran Canaria Airport in the Canary Islands. In 1977, the Canary Islands had some political tensions, wanting some independence from Spain. A group called MPAIAC were the ones fighting. They used violent and non-violent ways of doing this, and this would be one of the factors in this disaster. Alrighty, we're going to be talking about the flight crews and the flights and the overall experience and so forth. So, the Pan American flight had a very experienced flight crew. The captain Victor Grubbs flying a total of 21,045 hours, and 564 of those was on the Boeing 747. The first officer, Robert Bragg, a total flying hours of 10,800, and on the Boeing 747, 2,796. And the flight engineer, George Warnes, total flight hours of 15,210, 559 of those on the Boeing 747. At time 9:42, Pan American flight Clipper 1736 leaves JFK in New York towards Gran Canaria. On board was 16 crew and 380 passengers. At this moment in time, Pan America was flying across the Atlantic towards Gran Canaria. In the Netherlands was another Boeing 747, a KLM Royal Dutch Airlines flight KLM 4805. It was about to depart from Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands, Amsterdam, heading to Gran Canaria in the Canary Islands. They were supposed to land, deboard, refuel, and put on new passengers and head back to Amsterdam. Alrighty, let's talk about the crew on board the KLM flight. The crew on board was Captain Jacob Veldhuisen van Santan. His total flying time was 11,700 hours, and on the Boeing 747 was 1,545. He was a flight instructor, which meant he did not spend a lot of time in the air. The first officer was Klaus Meers. He had a total flying time of 9,200 hours, and on the Boeing 747, 95 hours. And the first engineer was Willem Schroeder. Total flying time was 17,031 hours, and on the 747 was 543 hours. On board this flight, we had a total of 14 crew members and 234 passengers. And at 9 o'clock exactly, the KLM flight 4805 left Schiphol, Amsterdam, and started heading towards Gran Canaria. Now, both Pan Am Clipper 1736 and KLM 4805 are on their ways towards the Canary Islands. While heading there, two men entered the airport, Gran Canaria, in the terminal building. They went to a nearby flower shop and waited. Then quietly left behind a bag, and inside that bag was a ticking clock. At 1 o'clock, a desk clerk at the airport received a phone call claiming that they were from the MPAIAC, the independence group we talked about earlier. They told the desk clerk that there were bombs planted in the airport terminal building, and they had 15 minutes to clear and evacuate everyone from the building. And 15 minutes later, exactly on the dot, the bomb exploded, destroying the terminal building. 8 people were injured, and because the person said there were bombs, the authorities now assumed that there were more and shut the airport down, closing all incoming aircrafts. At that moment in time, KLM flight 4805 was in a holding pattern above the airport. They were then told by the authorities that they were unsure of how long it would take and that they were to divert to Los Rodeos in Tenerife, and 25 minutes later, at 13:38, KLM landed at Los Rodeos Airport. At this time as well, just a couple of thousand feet above the KLM flight was Pan America, who was also in a holding pattern. and they wanted to remain that way until landing clearance because they had a lot of fuel on board, and just like the KLM, they were ordered to divert to Tenerife. Los Rodeos was a regional airport, meaning they weren't built to take the amount of aircraft that were about to come in from Gran Canaria. And all the flights from Gran Canaria were diverted to Los Rodeos. Now Los Rodeos is a small airport. They have one runway, one major taxiway parallel to the runway, and 4 smaller taxiways that connect the two. And within the airport, while waiting for Gran Canaria to reopen, all diverted planes took up all of the space and parking on the taxiway. This rendered the taxiway unusable for taxiing. Instead, jets had to use the runway as a taxiway to position themselves for takeoff. This was called a back taxi or a back track. A few hours later, the bomb had been contained in Gran Canaria and Gran Canaria was reopened. Pan Am was eager and ready to depart from Tenerife, but runway access was obstructed by the KLM flight in front of them. Because of the unknown amount of time this delay would take, the KLM decided to refuel at Los Rodeos rather than Las Palmas, Gran Canaria, to save time. This left the taxiway obstructed, so Pan Am had to wait for KLM, and maneuvering was out of reach, because if so, the clearance would only be 3.7 meters, which was unsafe. Refueling took about 35 minutes, then there was another delay of a missing Dutch family that did not return to the flight. Eventually they did. Then there was Rosina van Landschot, a tour guide who would become a rare statistic in this investigation. She survived the deadliest accident, who flew from Amsterdam to Tenerife on flight 4805. Alrighty, now let's talk about taxiing and takeoff preparations. Control Tower had instructed KLM to taxi down the entire runway and make a 180-degree turn to get onto takeoff position. While KLM was taxiing on the runway, the controller asked the flight crew to report when they were ready to copy the clearance. Just after KLM was given the instructions, Pan Am was told to follow the KLM jet down the runway and take the 3rd exit on their left and use the parallel taxiway. The crew was first unsure as to whether the controller said take the 1st or 3rd exit. The crew asked the controller and the controller responded, "The 3rd one, sir. 1, 2, 3, 3rd one." They began taxiing and started identifying the unmarked taxiway using the airport diagram. They successfully located the first 2 taxiways, Charlie 1 and Charlie 2, but they were having a conversation that indicated that they had not sighted and that they had missed the 3rd taxiway, Charlie 3. There were no signs and the blanket of fog barely allowed for visibility. The Pan Am crew were unaware of their location till the collision had occurred, which happened near the intersection at the 4th runway, Charlie 4. So if Pan Am were to take the 3rd exit, the angle of the 3rd taxiway would have required the aircraft to perform a 148-degree turn, which would have led to the crowded apron. Though at the end of the 3rd taxiway, Charlie 3, Pan Am would have had to make another 148-degree turn in order to continue towards the runway, similar to a mirrored Z. Charlie 4, the 4th taxiway, would have required a 35-degree turn. A study carried out by the Airline Pilots Association after the incident concluded that making the 148-degree turn at the end of Charlie 3 would have been a practical impossibility. Though the official report from the Spanish authorities said that the controller instructed Pan America to use Charlie 3 because this was the earliest exit that they could get and take to reach the unobstructed section of the parallel taxiway. Now, before we talk about the collision and the communication issues, let's talk about the weather. Remember I mentioned a blanket of fog? The Los Rodeos Airport is 633 meters above sea level, which was given rise to weather conditions that's different from other airports. Clouds at 600 meters above ground level, drifting clouds of different densities, causing wildly varying visibilities from being able to see and clear vision one moment to below minimum the next. The collision took place in a high density cloud. The Pan American crew found themselves in poor and rapidly deteriorating visibility. Almost as soon as they entered the runway and shortly after they turned, it decreased to 100 meters from previously being 500 while taxiing. Meanwhile, the KLM plane was still in good visibility, but with clouds blowing down the runway towards them. After they had completed their 180-degree turn in relatively clear weather and lined up on the center line, the next cloud was 900 meters down the runway, moving towards the plane at around 12 nautical miles. Alrighty, now that that has been discussed, let's talk about the communications, misunderstanding, the collision, and everything that followed. Just after lining up on the runway, the first officer completing the pre-flight checklist, Captain Veldhuisen van Santan advanced the aircraft's throttle and the plane started moving forward. First Officer Mers advised him that there was no air traffic control clearance, and the captain responded, "No, go ahead, ask first." First Officer Mer radioed in, "The KLM 4805 is now ready for takeoff and we are awaiting air traffic control clearance." The KLM crew then received instructions that specified the route the aircraft must follow after takeoff. Instructions used the word takeoff but did not include explicit statement that they were cleared for takeoff. First Officer Mears read back the flight clearance to the controller, completing the readback with the statement, "We are now at takeoff." Captain Veldhuisen van Santan interrupted the readback with the comment, "We gaan, we're going." Air traffic control could not see the runway and responded with "okay," which reinforced the misunderstanding that they had takeoff clearance. The controller immediately said, "Stand by for takeoff, I will call you," indicating that there was no clearance for takeoff. A simultaneous call from Pan America caused a mutual interference on the radio frequency, which was available in KLM as a 3-second long shrill sound. This caused the captain to not hear the message with the crucial response. Pan Am's cruise transmission had said, "We're still taxiing down the runway, the Clipper 1736." This message was blocked by the interference and an inaudible to the KLM crew. If heard by the KLM crew, it would have given time to abort takeoff. Due to the heavy fog, neither crew could see the plane on the runway. Ahead, in addition, neither of the aircrafts could be seen from air traffic control. The tower had no ground radars. After KLM had started their takeoff roll, the tower instructed Pan America to report when runway was clear. Pan America responded with, "Okay, we'll report when clear." On hearing this, the KLM engineer expressed concern about the Pan Am being clear of the runway by asking his fellow pilots, "Is he not clear, that Pan American?" Captain Veldhuisen van Santan emphatically responded, "Jawel, oh yes," and continued. Alrighty, now we are up to the collision. According to the Pan American cockpit voice recorder, the Pan American captain said, "There he is," when he spotted the KLM's landing lights through the fog, just as he approached Charlie 4. When it became clear that KLM jet was approaching at takeoff speed, Captain Grubbs exclaimed, "God damn, that son of a is coming," while First Officer Robert Bragg yelled, "Get off, get off, get off." Captain Grubbs applied full power and made a sharp left turn towards the grass to avoid the collision. By the time the KLM pilots saw Pan America, they were moving too fast to stop. In desperation, the pilots prematurely rotated the plane and attempted to clear the Pan Am by lifting, causing a 22-meter tail strike. The KLM 747 was within 100 meters of the Pan America and moving at approximately 140 knots. When it left the ground, its nose landing gear cleared the Pan Am, but its left side engine, lower fuselage, and the main landing gear struck the upper side of the Pan Am fuselage, ripping apart the center of the Pan Am fuselage, ripping apart the center of the Pan Am jet. Almost directly above the wing, the right side crashed through Pan Am's upper deck, right behind the cockpit. KLM Flight 4805 remained briefly airborne, but the impact had sheared off the outer left engine, caused significant amounts of shredded materials to be ingested by the inner left engine, and damaged the wings. The plane immediately went into a stall, rolled sharply, and hit the ground approximately 150 meters past the collision, sliding down the runway for a further 300 meters. The full load of fuel, which was just refueled, ignited immediately into a fireball that could not be put out for several hours. One of the 61 survivors from Pan America said sitting in the nose of the plane probably saved his life. He said, "We all settled back, and the next thing, an explosion took place, and the whole port side of the plane was torn open." Just to redirect quickly, Captain Veldhuisen van Santan was KLM's Chief of Flight Training and one of their most senior pilots. About 2 months before the accident, he had conducted the Boeing 747 qualification check on his co-pilot of Flight 4805. His photograph was used for publicity materials such as magazines, adverts, including the in-flight magazines on board the KLM flight. KLM had suggested initially that Veldhuisen van Santan should help with the investigation, unaware that he had been killed in the accident. Both jets were destroyed in the collision. All 248 passengers and crew aboard KLM had died, as did 335 passengers and crew aboard the Pan American plane. That was primarily due to the fire and explosions resulting from the fuel spillage and ignited in the impact. The other 61 crew and passengers aboard Pan Am survived, including the captain, first officer, and flight engineer. Most survivors on the Pan Am walked onto the intact left wing, the side away from the collision, through holes in the fuselage structure. The Pan Am's engines ran for a few minutes after the accident, even though First Officer Braggs intended to turn them off. But the switches where the engine's starters were located was ripped off on impact. Survivors waited patiently for rescue, but it did not come promptly. As nobody knew about the crash on the Pan Am, they were concentrated on the KLM hundreds of meters away in the thick fog and smoke. Eventually, most of the survivors on the wing dropped to the ground below. Alrighty, that was the crash, the collision, and the miscommunication. Now let's talk about the aftermath. The Canary Islands independent movement denied responsibility for the bombing at Gran Canaria that started the chain of events that led to the accident at Los Rodeos. The Los Rodeos airport was closed to all fixed-wing traffic for 2 days. The first aircraft to land was a US Air Force C-130, which landed on their main taxiway. They triaged injured passengers and transferred all surviving and injured to Gran Canaria. Many were also taken to the US Air Force Base in the United States for further treatment. The Spanish Army were also tasked with clearing the wreck from the runway and taxiways. By the 30th of March, the small planes could land, but large jets were not approved. Los Rodeos reopened by April 3rd after everything was cleared and repaired. The accident was investigated by the Spanish Aviation Accident Commission. About 70 investigators were involved, including reps from KLM and Pan Am and the US and Netherlands. Analysis showed that the CVR transcript, the cockpit voice recorder's transcript, showed that the KLM pilot thought he was cleared for takeoff, while air traffic control believed that KLM was stationary. It appears that the KLM's co-pilot was not certain about the takeoff clearance, as Captain Veldhuisen van Santan. The probable cause for this was that Captain Veldhuisen van Santan attempted to take off without clearance. Reason being wanting to comply with KLM's duty time rules and before the weather got worse. Critical and major factors contributing were the sudden fog limiting visuals and blinding of the crews and air traffic control, not being heard by radio interferences resulting in messages. These also contributed but were not as critical. The use of ambiguous language, non-standard phrases by KLM and air traffic control. For example, "we are at takeoff" and "okay." The Pan Am aircraft not leaving the runway at the third intersection, and the airport being forced to accommodate a large number of jets. The Dutch responded and were reluctant to take blame for the accident. The Netherlands Aviation Department responded while accepting that the captain taking off prematurely argued he should not be blamed for a mutual misunderstanding. The Dutch pointed out contributing factors as well, which included the pressure on all parties involved at the crowded airport, a sound on the cockpit voice recorder that indicated air traffic control had a soccer match on and that may have been a distraction, the ambiguity of the air traffic control clearance, also stating the Pan Am's message about still taxiing down the runway, but it was not audible, and Pan Am's missing the third exit. Although the Dutch authorities were reluctant to blame Captain Veldhuisen van Santen and his crew, the airline ultimately accepted responsibility and KLM paid the victims' families. There was also a lot of speculation about this, and this was the first accident to include the study of human contributing factors. Alrighty, now let's talk about the legacy left behind that changed the aviation industry and led to a lot of different safety procedures that is now standard for each and every airline, pilot, and air traffic control. Introduced requirements included standard phrasing to be used, such as departure and takeoff only to be used when taking off, as well as emphasis on English to be used as a common working language. Cockpit procedures changed, the hierarchical relations among crew were played down, and is one of the contributing factors to what is known today as crew resource management, which states no matter your experience, your rank, pilots are allowed to contradict each other if something is not right. And CRM training has been mandatory for all pilots since 2006, and in 1978, Tenerife added a second airport in the southern region, which is more safer than the prior airport northerly. And the Spanish government installed a ground radar system in the northern airport following the accident. Alrighty, before I end up today's video, I want to say thank you to everybody that voted in the poll for this video and this topic. And I also want to say that if you want to hear more about this from an actual pilot, I am not a pilot, I do wish I could be one, but if you want to hear more about this from an actual pilot, you can check out the link in my description box. There is an actual video from a pilot's perspective of this incident, and his video will be linked in the description box down below. Also, thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys did enjoy today's video. I found it interesting, learned something, and that is it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Please don't forget to drop a like, comment, subscribe, as well as check out all my social medias. Links are in the description box below, and I will do my best to link some of the flight information and some links below if you want to read more about this incident. Alrighty, thank you for watching. Bye bye.